Welcome back to another edition of the Mic Drop Podcast here, presented by the Believe Network and available everywhere you get your podcasts. I'm Mike Asti, and we're going to have a conversation on this show about some polarizing topics, to say the very, very least. And while I always enjoy discussing polarizing topics, I know my guest also enjoys discussing polarizing topics. And I am going to have this conversation about some polarizing topics surrounding the Pittsburgh Steelers and maybe even the Pittsburgh Penguins as well. You kind of know the topics. We're going to talk about them and give our takes here with my friend and colleague, KDKA's Josh Taylor. So, Josh, you've done a lot of broadcast and radio work in the past. This is the first time you're on this particular show of mine here on the Mic Drop Podcast. So thanks for jumping aboard, and we won't bore the listeners with our off-the-air conversation about our children and how we're taking care of them and dealing with our careers and trying to take care of them and the mess that is. But
hey, the off-air conversations are sometimes the best ones. And I'm sure there's other parents out there that are like, hey, I've been there before. Hey, like the dad conversations probably go a lot further than people think. That's all I'm saying.
100%. I should have worn my girl dad hat, actually.
I'm still waiting on mine in the mail. So I'm still early in the game.
You got both right now with the boy and a girl. Yeah. But yeah, 100%. That probably would be a very, very entertaining conversation. But there's enough mom and dad podcasts out there. Not to
I'll tell you this while I got you here, while everybody else is listening. Yeah, Mike, you only have one. You only have one kid right now. I'm at two. So enjoy playing zone while you can.
Right.
Parents with more than one child know what I mean. Like, enjoy playing zone, because once you get to man or worse, it's a whole nother ballgame. So enjoy playing zone defense while you can.
Yeah, you get more than one. They can kind of talk together. They can maybe throw signals. You might be able to try to steal those signs, like is also a topic in the sports world these days. But that doesn't matter to those kids because they can.
And my son, man, for a 2-year-old, he's like the size of a 5 or 6-year-old. So he's already a man beater. He can already beat you man on man. So good luck with that one. Just enjoy it while you can.
Yeah. We definitely right now are able to play that zone. But we'll see. We'll see about it if we're ever going to be playing the man-to-man or not. But Josh Taylor again from KDKA joining me here on Mic Drop, and it is available Apple, TuneIn, Google Play, etc. everywhere you get your podcasts. And to kick this off, and no pun intended, because we're going to open up talking some Steelers. This is the most polarizing topic of all, and maybe unfortunately, and I definitely think to an annoying level at this point, that it seems like everybody now agrees this is an annoying topic. You're already grinning. And this is Kenny Pickett and your thoughts here, because Kenny Pickett drafted by the Steelers as the only first-round QB of that draft, obviously the Pitt product. And I think now I've even seen some of the staunchest Pickett supporters kind of coming back down to earth and maybe saying they got to pump the brakes a little bit. And I've also even seen some of the Pickett haters that are kind of waiting and seeing as well. It almost seems like maybe we'll get a calming of this, but it's also off of Pickett struggling this year. And now I could argue Matt Candace may be calling some better plays, and we're still seeing Pickett struggle. For me, he hasn't really progressed from where he was last year to this year. And admittedly, there are some fans that kind of rooted against him this whole way through, but also some Pickett supporters that were willing to give him every single benefit of the doubt, but not really as much anymore. Where are you? Like, where have you been to paint this picture for our listeners? Where are you now on Kenny Pickett? And if you believe he can really be the Steelers franchise guy, independent of who is calling the plays, who is the coach, who are the players there, because that's really what this has to be about. It has to be about himself.
I was nervous when it first happened, not because I didn't think Kenny Pickett was worthy of the 20th overall pick or being QB1 in that draft.
Okay.
I was nervous about it specifically because of how people responded. And it's funny you mentioned how this is such a polarizing topic, because Kenny Pickett being drafted by the Steelers was immediately polarizing.
100%.
Immediately. And you had two schools of thought. You had the one school of thought was that, well, he was the Steelers quarterback, so he clearly could not fail, or that he was a quarterback at Pitt, so he clearly could not fail. And then you had other people saying, well, he was a quarterback at Pitt, so maybe he can fail. It was amazing, right. Like immediately how those those battle lines were drawn. And you kind of had some of us in the middle going, well, can we see what happens first and how this progresses? And I'll be completely honest with this. A lot of my colleagues at 93.7 The Fan were on one side of those battle lines being drawn. It was they dove in immediately. Some dove in head first. If they had two heads, they would have dove in both heads. But like to the point where you're going into their first mini camp and it's June 1st, and they're like, why is he number 3 in the depth chart? Because he's a rookie and it's June 1st and it's mini camp. Like, let things be what they are. And I think Mike Tomlin tried as hard as he could to make it seem less and less critical with everything that was happening with Kenny Pickett. They tried to bring him along as slowly and as easily as they possibly can because they didn't want to put too much on him too soon. And that's what you ideally want to do as a head coach with a rookie quarterback. You don't want to have too much on a guy too early because, you know, I know the saying is pressure either busts pipes or makes diamonds, but you want to try to delay that
pressure,
result
no diamonds, 100%. Yeah,
right. And even going into the season when he was the backup quarterback, you're thinking, okay, you knew they at least had some understanding of where he was and maybe what he was capable of doing.
Yeah, his rookie year,
And I'll honestly say, you know, the results from the first few games of the season kind of forced their hand. It forced their hand to go to Kenny Pickett sooner. I felt like they went with him more or less because of a lack of options, necessarily because of a ringing endorsement. Because let's go back to that game against the Jets where Kenny Pickett came in at halftime. You know, Mitch Trubisky didn't look too bad, so to speak. But when you took that first half with the Jets and you clearly saw that it just was not where it needed to be, they had already turned it over a time or two before then. So things were so stagnant. And the thought process was, we'll put him in, see what happens. Maybe he gives him a spark. And for a few minutes, he did.
Yeah, and if you're struggling and you probably are not really a championship contender in your heart of hearts, why not at that point?
Why not at that point? And you don't want the season to get out of hand. So he comes in, and of course, first pass he throws is intercepted by his own former teammate at Pitt, Jordan Whitehead, which is super ironic. But, you know, it's to be expected with a young quarterback. There are going to be some bumps in the road. And his first pass was intercepted. His last pass was intercepted. But there was a lot of good things there in the middle. And I think a lot of people were so happy about what they saw in the middle, they tried to make the middle more important than the bookends. And it's like, folks, like, let's bring ourselves back down to reality here. He played great, but there were some things that rookie quarterbacks go through.
Right.
And instead of just ignoring the problems that rookie quarterbacks have, embrace that. It's part of the process. Embrace the fact that he's going to make mistakes.
Yeah, the franchise knew it too. Tomlin knew
they
it.
Knew.
Growing pains is going to happen with a rookie, no matter who you are, and they have, even with legendary QBs. 100%.
And my thing is, and there are rookie quarterbacks who have had issues coming into the league. There are some that sat for a whole year. Aaron Rodgers didn't play his first season. Patrick Mahomes didn't play his first season because they were with teams that had that luxury of not having to play your guy right away. Yeah. I also think Andy Reid said, look, you know, I know what I want to do with him long term, but I'm going to clean up all the things with him first and then roll out all the plans that I have for him so we can do that in year 2, because I make this comparison a lot. I don't want to get too far off topic, but I always call Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes as the most symbiotic quarterback-coach relationship that you can ever find anywhere at any time, because Andy Reid was a coach who played under Lavelle Edwards at BYU, which is one of the most revolutionary passing offenses of its time. And it was one of the precursors to the air raid, which is what Patrick Mahomes played under. Well, Andy Reid starts to get into coaching, and he coaches on Lavelle Edwards' staff. Then he moves up to the NFL, goes with Mike Holmgren to Green Bay. And what offenses are they coaching there? The West Coast, another one of the precursors for the air raid. So
now you got like an air raid West Coast combination right now is what they're really doing with the Chiefs, 100%.
You have the perfect philosophical match with coach and quarterback. Oh, no, but by the way, if Andy Reid can physically create a quarterback in a lab, it's probably going to be Patrick Mahomes. So it's the perfect symbiotic relationship there. So Andy Reid had the luxury of time to say, hey, let's figure out how we want to put this in first. Let's lay the foundation. Let's work out the kinks with this kid. So that way when we have him hit his feet on the ground, he hits the ground running. And that's exactly what they did. The Steelers didn't have that luxury because they didn't have the luxury of a guy in front of them that they can trust. Alex Smith is as much of a, hey, put this guy in here to hold the fort for now as they come. So they had that opportunity.
Yeah, it's a better option than Trubisky, who and to be fair to Trubisky, he was a first-round draft pick that was very upset and in his feelings about feeling like he got screwed over and didn't get in a good situation with the Bears.
Right.
He was still very, very young, whereas Smith in that situation was kind of comfortable with, I've had a solid career. I overcame some injuries. I'm not a Hall of Famer here, but I did a lot to bridge the gap, and that's
Smith
just what
was
I am.
1-1. Like,
right, like that's what
he was 1-1.
Right, like he was more comfortable in himself there, whereas, I mean, maybe if Alex Smith was 10 years earlier in his career, it might not have worked out as well. Like it was a perfect storm of probably a bad situation for Pickett to be thrown into the fire. But a lot of rookies are dealing with that situation. And then for me, it's not even so much about wins and losses. I do want to get your thoughts on this exactly here now in year 2 is, okay, last year you give that mulligan. You're going to have growing pains. There's definitely problems there. They did kind of have the Tebow effect of pulling some games out of where, but there certainly were some issues there, and the stats weren't amazingly beautiful. The offensive line was bad. Najee struggled earlier in the season. All of that. Canada's play calling, I think everybody would agree, even his starts as defenders, was worse last year than this year, and there's reasons for that. You get to this year, though, with Najee kind of getting a little going, certainly Jaylen Warren allowing the running game to move, the offensive line still not where you want it, but better than last year, better than the year before.
I'd say markedly better than, especially these last couple games.
Certainly these last few games, 100%. Granted, the bar is not too high from where they were years ago, but definitely better. Canada's play calling is improving. Him being on the sideline seems to actually work out and be a better thing that may continue as well. And yet, for me, my problem is I'm not seeing Kenny Pickett see the field any better. I'm not seeing the downfield passing being any better. I'm not even seeing him having like control of the game and the tempo until the fourth quarter, maybe. But I'm not seeing the certain things away from the stats that are better for him this year than last, which you definitely want to see in a progression of your franchise guy. That's my main issue away from even everything that's polarizing about him. Like in comparison to rookie year to now, have you seen a progression? Like, where are you in the evaluation process as Pickett as a player? If he has taken any steps forward, why maybe he hasn't, and if he still can for you?
I think we found just exactly where he's comfortable in the offense. I think we know now the things he's comfortable with doing. I think we know the things he likes to do. I think we know, just exactly maybe what some of the tendencies are. And that's not a bad thing. I mean, sometimes when you're scouting a guy, you can figure out maybe what weaknesses are from understanding tendencies, but you have to figure out what your guy is. You have to figure out what he's comfortable doing. And one of the things he's comfortable doing clearly is being able to play in the fourth quarter and say, hey, this game is within a one possession. You can either tie it or win it. Let's see what we got here. And I think his ability to, and this is something that people keep looking at it as a negative, and I don't. I think it's more or less as a positive. I think it's a positive because when the game is really at its most critical point, he's able to focus a zero in and say, okay, it has to be this or it has to be that.
Yeah.
And I think it allows him to be more assertive in his decision-making.
And a lot of athletes freak out. A lot of great all-time great athletes freak out in those moments, and everything's great for them stat-wise, and then they aren't quote-unquote clutch.
Right. We'll reach back to the quote.
Clutch. Yeah.
We'll reach back to the quote. Pressure bust pipes or creates diamonds. Yeah. In that particular situation, it creates diamonds for him. And I think that's – and people are saying, well, what do you do with that to kind of extrapolate to the first three quarters? Well, the point of the truth of the matter is that the first three quarters, the context isn't the same. The game situation is the same. Is that an excuse for how he's playing in the first three quarters? Absolutely not. But that's probably why you see a better approach in the fourth quarter than you do in the first three, because I think in that fourth quarter, he's forced to decide. You don't have time to figure it out. You don't have time and luxury of, we'll get him on the next drive. No, this is it. You do it now or never. And I think that's what kind of forces him to be a little bit more decisive. Now, if you can find a way to make him a little bit more decisive and a little bit more assertive and maybe speed that clock up in the first three quarters, I think that's the difference.
Yeah, how do you simulate that pressure in the first quarter? Because it doesn't really exist, even though you want to in practice or whatever.
You can't. You almost have to get to the point where, and I understand that when you're in that moment, you were going through progressions and there's a lot of corollaries. If A, if B, then B, if B, then C. I understand all that. But if there's a little bit more of an emphasis of Kenny Pickett pre-snap of understanding, okay, here's my read, here's where I'm going. And if he can understand that pre-snap and then have something in his back pocket, but if this happens, then I'm going to go here. If you have a better understanding of that, you can process that faster, then I think you see that better.
Do
in
you
the
think
first three
maybe he
quarters.
overthinks things in the first 3 quarters, and then the
I
fourth
do
quarter
a
you
little
can't?
bit. I think
Doesn't matter how smart you are, you can't do it in the fourth quarter.
I think he does overthink it a little bit. And I think sometimes he's trying to either make the perfect read or make the perfect play. And it's kind of a paralysis by analysis. Whereas, like I said, in the fourth quarter, you don't have a lot of time to think. You just go. Like, what's the old line from Tom Cruise in Top Gun? If you think, you're dead. And I feel like the first 3 quarters, he's trying to make that kind of play to make that perfect read or make that perfect play in order to make his offense work. Now, I will say this also. I think part of it also is, the offensive line play has not been consistent in both of his years in the NFL. I think we can agree with that.
100%.
And that was part of the emphasis of bringing in Broderick Jones because they wanted a more consistent offensive line. Also bringing in Isaac Seumalo.
I thought that was a slam dunk draft pick, 100%. I thought it was the best draft pick in years, honestly. I didn't even like the Najee pick. I thought that was the best one. Yeah.
He was the guy I wanted. Going into the offseason, I've been saying this so many different places. I had a checklist of things that I wanted. I knew Isaac Seumalo was a free agent. I'm like, hey, if I can get a guy from Philly, one of the best lines in the game, bring him over here and plug him in, that's a big move. They signed him in free agency. And now, granted, I wanted any guy from Georgia, the Steelers, who could get their hands on. I really wanted Broderick Jones.
Right.
Really wanted Broderick Jones.
Yeah, the offseason it's hard to be mad about. I mean, they did everything they kind of had to do, and obviously going to go to Pickett again in year 2, and they did keep Kanda, but again, I do feel like the play calling has been better. So,
but when you add all that up, when you add all that up with everything they've done in the offseason, and then you look at what this roster is constructed like now, and then you had this promise of, okay, we're going to be more physical, we're going to be like a team full of bullies, and you hear that discussion, and you haven't seen that. A lot in that first, the first 8 games of the season. You see flashes of it. You see flashes of the run game happening, which is why I was so encouraged by the Tennessee game. I know some people get frustrated by what they see. I was actually encouraged.
I do think it was a positive, but for both running backs too, working together and moving the ball, no matter who's out there. 100%.
The running game was a lot more cohesive. The 2 running backs together almost averaged 6 yards a carry as a group, and I like them as a group. I like them as a pairing. The better offenses in the league use running back by committee, and it's efficient and it works. And that way you're guaranteed to have fresh legs somewhere. I think it's a thing that works.
Yeah, so sorry about your money, but that's like the way of the world.
It's just
that's a whole other conversation. But yes, the reason why elite running backs aren't getting big money is because you can do it with 2. You're better off doing it with 2. It's better off when the elite backs. That's the thing of the past. Yeah,
coaches don't get paid.
100%.
Coaches don't get paid if your bell cow averages 4.5 a carry. Coaches get paid off wins and losses. That's how they're looking at it. And tandem running back play, and not only the fact that it helps as far as injuries are concerned, it also gives you different options. It gives you different looks. It allows you to give a defense more things to think about.
Especially when there are different types of running backs.
Exactly. Because if 100%. You have a defense that's just saying, okay, well, if Najee's getting the ball, we know we got to clog the middle. As opposed to Jaylen Warren, he gets one crack, he can plant and go.
Yep.
He finds one space, he can go. Najee Harris isn't built that way. Najee Harris says, hey, Najee, here's this hole for you. Go find that hole. Whereas Jaylen Warren, hey, Jaylen, you find a crack, you go. And that's what
they have a perfect thunder and lightning. It's cliche for the running back position, but that's exactly what they have, and that's what worked when you have tandems throughout the history of the league. It's
incredibly
clearly going to lead to Najee probably being gone because he's never going to get the big bag that he wants. But as we stand now, and who knows, but as we stand now, it's working out on the field, away from the money conversation. It is working.
And
working down.
And here's why it really dovetails into what Kenny Pickett's doing. Because if Kenny Pickett can be able to make plays off of his run game, feed off that, use play action, or the space that's going to be created in the backfield, or just in the defensive backfield, because it's going to bring an extra safety up to that line of scrimmage, guess it's going to make more space for it. It's going to make more space for Deontay Johnson in short to intermediate. It's going to make more space for George Pickens in intermediate to deep down the field. Or vice versa, because if teams start to key in on George Pickens like Tennessee did, guess what it did? It opened up the run game up front, and then it opened up short and intermediate for Deontay Johnson. It had to take a collective, understanding of this is how this is going to be mapped out. And now this offense is getting to that point where you see what the possibilities are. You see what the tendencies are, and you're starting to have guys that do their jobs well, getting those opportunities to do their jobs well. I thought Broderick Jones at right tackle made a lot of sense because it helped both the run game and the pass game. Because he opened up things in the run game we didn't see before. And he had Harold Landry blocked into another zip code. Like, now, granted,
and we're seeing clearly the difference of having Deontay Johnson out there versus not having Deontay Johnson out there.
Exactly.
Because if you double cover Pickens, you have somebody else in the short and intermediate, certainly more of a DJ type of thing. And he really, I think, for the first time since coming back from an injury in that Tennessee game, really showed his impact, regardless of numbers.
Right.
You could see the presence he was by just even being out there and what that did for the defense. But what I do want to ask you a couple more here on Pickett. Everything we're saying makes tons of sense. Is it in any way a concern for you that all of that's going on and exists? And Freiermuth has also been hurt, by the way, which is a big deal too. Yes. But Pickett is legitimately missing receivers. He is legitimately throwing to somebody who's double covered when there's somebody open. He is legitimately messing up a route, which maybe leads into why Pickens is upset. And there's rumors that that's part of why he's upset. Like, Pickett, to me, going to the Tennessee game, which is the most recent as we're recording this, the end was great, but I think the reason why the Tennessee game is exactly what you're talking about, that our colleagues who were big Kenny Pickett, he's a Pitt guy, we're going to give every benefit of the doubt under the sun. If it doesn't go right, everyone else is at fault. They backpedaled off of that because they watched the man have no one criticize play calling, because I think everyone would agree it was Canada's probably best play calling day of 2-3 years with the Steelers. And everything else work out relatively well. And then Pickett misfire. Was it just a bad day at the office, or is that a concern that even if everything else goes right, it's a chance Pickett is still not an elite quarterback? That, I mean, to be fair, it took him years to get going at Pitt. He had that Heisman season, but a lot of Pitt fans were out on him after year 2 and 3 there. It took until Mark Whipple and Jordan Addison were there to really build around him and have correct play calling. So
a really good offensive line and a really good run game.
So maybe to be fair to Pickett, and you don't want to hear this from your first round quarterback, maybe he is a guy that you can win with everything goes right, but it won't be perfect. But maybe he's never going to be a QB that elevates everybody else. Like you're talking about Patrick Mahomes and that Andy Reid experience. He's been able to do it no matter whether Hill's there or Hill leaves, and then he literally has better numbers and they win a championship again because he elevates everybody else. Is Pickett not going to be an elevator and more just rely on others, and could even screw it up when they're on their game? Okay.
I don't think he is now, but that doesn't mean he can't be later. It just means that for now, and this is with any quarterback. I don't understand how people say, well, just get the quarterback and figure everything else out. No.
Oh, you need a lot more.
To get a quarterback, put him in position to succeed. First and foremost, I don't care how good he is. I don't care if a quarterback is a cyborg. First and foremost, protect him. That should be your first priority. Every quarterback, when they bring him in, whether he is a first-round pick, a seventh-round pick, or an undrafted free agent, the moment he gets in the game, you better have 5 guys in front of him that can protect him. He needs to have the protection around him, because how do you expect this guy to do his job if he doesn't have all the tools that he needs? And now you want to talk about skill position guys. That's another conversation, because I feel skill position guys, they fit a need regardless of situation and circumstance and location and level. You need to have certain guys to do certain jobs at whatever level of football you're playing. So skill players, that concept, that conversation is interchangeable. You got to be able to protect him, and you got to put him in a system that allows him to exploit what he does well. And you have to be able to have other guys around him to complement him in what he does well. So what complemented Kenny Pickett at Pitt? A really good veteran offensive line, a talented wide receiver in George Addison, some pretty good tight ends that might have been not as heralded, but they made plays when they needed to, and a really good run game.
Yeah, that O-line is very underrated to that ACC title year too. That O-line was
that Pitt offensive line was a lot better than people gave them credit for.
And it's not been as good since, which is why they haven't been as good. 100%, yeah.
Yeah, we'll totally agree with that. So in this particular situation in Pittsburgh, what do you think you're going to need for Kenny Pickett to be able to grow and develop? A really good offensive line, a reliable run game, and a couple of good receivers, and maybe a couple of tight ends that make plays here and there. So you have a few things on the checklist, but you don't have all of it. Or some days you may have 1 or 2, and you may not have another 2. And that's another thing that comes around. We like to talk about play calling as if play calling is the problem. Sometimes execution is the problem. Because
it can be. It can be. I think we saw it against Tennessee. Yeah.
Yes, we saw it against Jacksonville too. There's drop passes, there's missed blocks, there's missed holes, there's penalties, there's all these things that we love to hang on coaches. But that's on players. Like you're in practice all week long for a reason to get ready for this, and you come out and you can't execute it. I can't 100% hang down on coaches because it's their job to go out and do it. And it's not just me saying this. Chris Long, former NFL player, Green Light is a show that he does with a couple of people, and I really like that show. But he talked about this, I think it was after the Jacksonville game. He said, you want to talk about all these people, how about you execute? How about these guys that are out here doing their jobs, do their jobs?
Yeah, it's a former player saying it too. That carries more weight admittedly than us. Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
And that's where I kind of lean on that argument. When players are telling you, oh, it's execution, that's something that I pay attention to. I tend to pay attention to a lot more of what players and former players and coaches and former coaches say, because they're out there. Yeah. They're there in real time. They know what's happening more than we do, even though we think we know everything. We like to pretend that we know everything.
And as you know, really a lot of former players, when they get into media, they sometimes hesitate to kind of criticize their brethren, the former players, and sometimes fans, that's criticism that a lot of fans levy that, oh, you're of course going to go to coaching because you don't want to criticize the player. For a former all-pro player to be willing to criticize some players and say you're not executing, and that's not like it's his thing trying to be a jerk, that's just him being truthful. Yeah. That also carries tons of weight too. And I think that's been very, very evident for sure. 100%.
And I'm going to listen to guys like Chris Long who give kind of criticism like that. I'm going to listen to the Shannon Sharps of the world who aren't afraid to tell you what's happening. I'm going to listen to the RG3s of the world and the Ryan Clarks of the world who are going to tell you, hey, as far as on the field stuff goes, there's a lot of off the field stuff that gets bandied about. But as far as on the field stuff and what they see, I'm going to listen to that because that's stuff they see. They still have peers that are out there playing. They still have peers that have gone into coaching. Or that are in
and players roles. Are telling them. They're hearing this from the guys that are still active.
People talk. Mike, you know this as well as I do. Yeah. We know the media business is pretty much high school. Things spread like wildfire. You don't think
unfortunately, yes. Pretty much.
Like we talk, like amongst us, we talk all the time. We don't think coaches and players do. Of course they do. So all of this comes back around to say, you know, we could talk about how this person has failed Kenny Pickett and that person's failed Kenny Pickett. The truth of the matter is everybody has a job to do. Covering college football, I remember covering Arkansas. There was a thing with the defense particularly. And one thing they used to say was everybody do your 111. In other words, you got to do your fraction of the whole job.
Yeah.
Everybody out there has to do their 111th on the field. And if one guy, and you hear a lot with this locker room say it, if one guy doesn't do their job, it all falls apart. So we got to start paying more attention to that when there are certain guys that aren't doing their jobs and it all falls apart, which leads me to believe Broderick Jones being added to this offense, I don't think it was a coincidence. I think they're trying to find just small ways here and there to try to clean up some of these things that are happening. And not only that, but expand some things too, where you have more guys that can do more things that provide more capability for this offense. Because it's one thing when you have running backs that can only do one thing. Or a tight end that can catch and can't block, or a tight end that can block and can't catch, or an offensive lineman who's good at run blocking but not good at pass blocking, or this guy's good at this, as opposed to, hey, let's get more guys that can do more than one thing so we can do more than one thing in any given situation. And then it gives you a little bit more flexibility. And I thought the offense looked a lot better because of it. Just from the adding of Broderick Jones, being able to excel in the run game and the pass game, that created a lot of difference with this
offensive line is very, very underrated, and the nail that you hit on the head too, it doesn't matter who you are. Every quarterback has to be in a situation that breeds success in order to have success. And sometimes even needs to be in the right situation that would fit them. If Ben Roethlisberger, I say this all the time, if Ben Roethlisberger was drafted on the Patriots and had to deal with Belichick, that wouldn't have worked. They would have butted heads. That wouldn't have worked probably. So you have to be in the right, you have to be in the right situation that works for you. And if it doesn't work out with a QB, a first round draft pick, like you mentioned, O-line, just ask David Carr. He got sacked, 100 times every game. Didn't
ask Andrew Luck.
Yeah. That's why he retired early, even though he put up some numbers.
Career.
Yeah. So, like for example, if that doesn't work out though, or somebody quits because they're kind of sick of it, or whatever the case may be, it's not even just the QB ever. That means it's a collective failure. If you have a first round draft pick quarterback that ends up not being success and ends up out of there after only a few years, the head coach, the GM, everybody on down, the players, the coordinators, the quarterback himself, they all failed because the job at hand is clearly to have success with that first round guy. And that is why they're going to give Pickett more time, even if we're still seeing growing pains in year 2.
And Mike, they don't have to take our word for it. They don't have to listen to us.
Right.
Go look at Arizona. Go look at Chicago.
Right.
Go look at the Jets. Go look at the Giants. Go look at all these teams that put all this stock in quarterbacks. and did not put enough stock in the guys around them to make the quarterback successful. Arizona might be looking for a quarterback for the third time in half a decade because they keep failing to put the infrastructure around the quarterback. You mean to tell me you're going to draft a quarterback and then 2 years later, well, he has all these flaws. Well, you're the one who drafted him. You didn't know that?
And then you go to the Jets, even worse, where not only are they cycling in quarterbacks, and obviously they have a young quarterback that's not going to clearly be the future in Zach Wilson, but they tried to put lipstick on a pig and say, we got everything else. We add a Hall of Fame quarterback. We're going to go ahead and win a championship. They didn't look at the offensive line at all, and then that quarterback ended up getting hurt. He's gone, and you're still screwed by the young guy because the Hall of Famer's not out there because your offensive line is not right. And I don't want to debate that individual play, but the offensive line is a problem, 100%.
But more importantly, they didn't emphasize getting all the other pieces in place until they got the other quarterback. It was like,
They didn't do it for Zach Wilson. They didn't do it for Sam Darnold. They're doing it for Rodgers, but they have no offensive line. And
why can't you do that from a rookie from the beginning? Why can't you have an offensive line in place for rookie from the beginning? And the Giants puzzle me. It's like, how do you go from what you had from the beginning of Eli Manning's career when you had such a great offensive line, you had an efficient run game, you had reliable receivers, you had excellent tight end play. They got the most that they can get out of a guy like Visanthe Shenko. Like, you're getting all of this with that organization, and then all of a sudden you just quit cold turkey. And you thought it was going to work?
Yeah, you basically got a poor man's Eli Manning and brought less around him besides running back.
And you're making the same mistakes over and over again.
Right.
But the worst part about it is the people who are doing these things, they're the ones saying, well, we can't do this now. Well, you're the one that did it, and you're not being held accountable for it. It makes no sense. So this is where I do credit the Steelers. I credit the Steelers for having the opportunity to say, you know what, we're bringing this guy in. Let's allow him to build slowly, but let's put pieces around him that allow him to build slowly. Because, believe it or not, that's what they did with the previous guy.
Yeah, 100. That's exactly. Yeah, they stuck.
He was
with
taking
Ben.
snaps from an All-Pro in Jeff Hardings, and he had he had a Hall of Famer at right guard. He was handing the ball off to a Hall of Famer, and he was throwing it to an arguable Hall of Famer.
Yeah, that's why I hate. That's why I hate because we've seen this a lot, especially this year. The comparisons of Ben's stats and Ben's team success and having a ring and all of that early in his career versus
a much better team early in his career.
Much better team around him. Much better team around him, and he also still had his bad moments. But yes, he was very good overall.
But he had guys around him.
He
had guys around him that if he made mistakes, they can at least clean up for that. It also kind of leads to this
they did it in Super Bowl 40. They had to cover up for him in that game. Yeah.
And it also leads to this myth that, Ben apparently created himself. And it's like, no, guys, no. You had to build to that. This is the same thing they're trying to do, at least in my opinion. That's what I believe they're trying to do. They're trying to bring him along slowly and have the guys around him help him to grow. So when he gets to that point down the road where he's been through all that stuff and made all the mistakes and learned from the mistakes and corrected the mistakes, you got to let him learn from them and correct them and then do them better over time. When you get to that point, then maybe he does become an elevator of guys around him. Maybe he does become a guy. And we know the leadership qualities that he possesses. But you got to let him learn those problems first.
He does have the intangibles for sure. And you could even look at Brady's career. He was surrounded by a great team early on.
Yes.
He wasn't the MVP yet, even though they were winning. And then he eventually built to that and was able to elevate guys when they had less around him in certain years too with New England. So that's the process. That is exactly the process and the plan. That's clearly what the Steelers are doing. Josh Taylor of KDKA 93.7 The Fan joining me here on Mic Drop. Made possible throughout the Believe Network family of networks, and then also everywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, TuneIn, Google Play, etc. But I want to segue because you're talking about keeping continuity and building around him and kind of having a sound way of bringing up a first-round quarterback that, let's face it, when you pull the trigger and go first round, doesn't matter who he is, whether he's from a college in your city or not, you're tied to that man, and you got to make it work with that man no matter what. And if it goes off the rails off the field, that's still on you. If it goes off the rails on the field, that's still on you. So
at least it should be.
You're right. And that is clearly what the fans are going to hold this regime to, as they should. But part of that, I believe, is keeping Matt Canada to this point. A lot of fans were out on him a couple years ago, but then the excuse of Big Ben being older and can't move and the offensive line being so bad was there. They kept him around. Last year, I think the play calling was something to be desired, but he was able to stay and get another crack at it this year. It is improving now, but part of that to me is about this continuity. Kenny Pickett has already proven in college that if he continuously has a carousel of coaches, that is a problem for him. He didn't have a relationship with any coach until he got until he got Whipple. They had a great relationship. He had his Heisman season, didn't have it prior. So if you want to bring an offensive coordinator after offensive coordinator after offensive coordinator, QB coach after QB coach, that's going to make it harder on a guy as he develops. So
go ask Cordell Stewart about that.
100%. Where are you on Matt Canada in terms of his tenure with the Steelers? The fact that maybe there is a difference in him now. It does feel like there's a difference even in mentality, clearly where he's standing on the sideline, and then how that maybe could work. And based on the fact that he's kind of improving in his play calling, but Kenny Pickett is still struggling, are we in a situation that I think fans maybe will burn social media down, that Matt Canada's likely going to stay the course and be back again next year if this continues? Like, has Matt Canada actually bought him some time off of Pickett struggling? Where are you on the other polarizing end of this of Matt Canada?
I think he's turned down the heat on the stove, but he's not out of the skillet. If that's the best analogy.
That's perfect. I get it. Yeah.
I don't think he's fully acquitted himself. I think he's gotten some people off of his back. And I think the bigger thing is he's at least brought the conversation back around to, okay, maybe it wasn't him the entire time. And some of us who aren't ready to run the man out the door have been saying it hasn't been him the entire time. It like I said before, with this offense, it's been different things on different days.
It's never just one man.
It's never just one guy.
I mean, in any walk of life, it's not just one person if a company fails or a team fails.
Because some days it's the receivers, some days it's the offensive line, some days it's the running backs, sometimes it is the play caller. Sometimes it's just, and there are some days when it's everybody. Like San Francisco, it was everybody.
Yeah.
Against Houston, after Kenny Pickett got hurt, it was all of it. It all just came down and collapsed. But it does come back around to say this, and this is something that I think people get in such of a routine of hearing one thing, and they just kind of just clamp onto it like a pit bull's jaws. I talked about this on Fourth Down Steel City podcast with Chris Mack and Greg Finley. I said, look, mob mentality is a hell of a drug. We love to latch on to stuff that other people say.
We do.
We hear it so often, and you hear it so many times, you're going to think it's true.
It's a societal thing.
Especially when it's the same people hammering it in
and to be fair,
again,
some of
over
our
a long
colleagues,
period of time. And I'm staring at my camera on purpose for a reason because everybody knows what I'm talking about. So when you keep hearing something so often, sooner or later you're going to start thinking, well, maybe it's that person. And back in my mind, I'm going, wait a minute, where's the run game for this team? Because we didn't see one for this organization for half a decade after the bye week last year. After the bye week last year, the run game finally showed up after 5 years. And everybody's like, where did this come from? Yeah, it was missing the whole time. You didn't notice? That's one of those things you point to and say, that might not necessarily be the offensive coordinator. Because remember, the guy that everybody wants back now? Everybody's like, oh, man, I miss Todd Haley. Oh, now you miss him 5 years later.
Yeah, I know.
When you pushed him out the door, you couldn't stand him. But when he left and when Le'Veon Bell subsequently left, the run game walked out the door with both of them. Because that's where the emphasis on the run game, that's the last time it was really that prevalent. And now we're getting back to that. We're getting back to seeing this team emphasize that, because not only is it something you should have had all along, it also helps your quarterback develop. It also helps your quarterback do his job. It also opens up room for your receivers, including your short to intermediate guy and your deep guy. It forces defenses to defend every blade of grass, as Mike Tomlin likes to call it.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not just a play that's called. And we've seen this team call plays, and they just don't work. If you follow certain people on Twitter that actually show you cut-ups of film, there's one in particular, Josh, he's either Josh Norris or Josh Cohen. There's a lot of Joshes out here talking about
There are a lot of Josh, a lot of Mikes, a lot of Josh.
A lot of Mikes, a lot of Joshes. But there were cut-ups of plays that each team in the league, or if not each team, most of them were running the same concept. And you see all of them doing the same thing. But there were one or two that weren't doing it very well. And one of them was the Steelers. They were running just a simple split zone duo concept. And the Steelers were just getting it wrong. And everyone's like, oh, so that's Matt Canada. No, that's one guy not being able to block another guy. It's just, that's not your offensive coordinator's fault. And it drives me down this path. Because there are some plays as an offensive coordinator, you're not going to call. if you know they're not going to do it.
It's a belief in your team absolutely influences you whether it should or not. But I guess I want to then follow up.
If you know your offensive line can't block for your quarterback, you're not going to call a deep shot on a 3rd and 16 because you want your quarterback to get killed or potentially turn it over.
Or you shouldn't, especially when you have a young quarterback you're trying to protect and you're also trying to be successful. But
you want him to be your long-term guy.
Do you think there's been a shift and a change in Matt Canada? Has he actually? Obviously, he's not listening to the fans, but what the fans were saying about play calling last year and the year before, has he actually made adjustments? And is there an improvement in play calling independent of whether the players are executing? Have you noticed that?
I think it's chicken and egg. I think
or is that overblown, maybe?
Of course, it's always overblown. I mean, we're in Pittsburgh. Everything's overblown.
Yeah, it's true.
But I think it's chicken and egg. I think he's gotten a little bit more comfortable calling certain things. But I think he's also become more comfortable because the execution has gotten better. And I think the execution has gotten better because the personnel has gotten better. Because you can't tell me that the sudden shift in how this offense is performing didn't somehow coincide with the insertion of Broderick Jones into the lineup. You can't tell me it didn't coincide with the return of Deontay Johnson to the lineup. You can't tell me it didn't coincide with maybe seeing more of Darnell Washington at tight end. Oh, wait, the run game's getting better now because we're seeing Washington at tight end and Jones on the line. Oh, wait, the passing game's starting to open up because Deontay Johnson's making plays in short and intermediate. Oh, wait, we're seeing better plays in the pass game deep because we're seeing one-on-one opportunities for George Pickens on the outside, and they're recognizing it. You can't tell me all these things aren't connected. I think it's a combination of, A, Matt Canada starting to understand what works better for the personnel he has, B, the personnel itself getting better, and C, the players themselves bringing some feedback to the coach and saying, hey, if we do this, then we can be successful doing that. I think him being on the sideline was an excellent thing. And it seemed like everybody, from Mike Tomlin on down, everybody seemed to have good responses to it. Kenny Pickett might have been the only one that was kind of like, maybe the same even keel. Because he says, look, he and I have conversations all the time. We're always able to talk.
It may not make a difference where the guy's located to him.
Right. But him being on the field where he could talk to the other position coaches, he could talk to the other guys in the offense, he can reinforce things with the offensive line and say, hey, guys, fix this here, clean this up here, and this will work. All of that kind of coincides and it congeals and it becomes better. I think it's just been a rising tide lifting all boats. And Matt Canada's boat just happens to be one of the bigger ones in the water at the time.
Yeah, and he has been able to kind of alleviate some of the heat on him and maybe indirectly off Pickett still struggling or whatever else is going on. But as you know, no matter what, Steeler fans hate the offensive coordinator.
It's been that way for 30 years, Mike.
Yeah, no matter what, they're going to hate the offensive coordinator. Todd Haley was scoring points, and they hated the offensive coordinator. They will always
hated Bruce Arians.
And one of the and I've said this too. And everyone loves him except Steeler fans. But one of the worst things that could happen to Kenny Pickett perception-wise, because we opened up the show talking about how there was a polarizing atmosphere right away, and it was going to happen when he got drafted out of Pitt. And yes, there are a lot of West Virginia and Penn State fans that are Steeler fans that maybe are secretly rooting against him. A lot of Pitt fans that were but there were also, I think we got to admit this too now, there also were a lot of Pitt fans that were saying that I'm going to blame everybody else, and I'm going to force this guy on you, and I'm going to defend him to no end. So those things got together and made this, for us who are trying to be even keel, not fun at all, basically.
Yeah, it created its own MCU Civil War, didn't it?
It created an annoyance, but I think if the Steelers would ever part ways with Matt Canada, that would put even more pressure and turn up the heat on Kenny Pickett even more, fair or unfair, because while he'd be learning a new coach, which would be difficult for a young quarterback, the scapegoat would be gone. The punchline would be gone. The social media blame would be gone. And then if he still struggles with who the fans want, or certainly without Matt Canada, you'd be left having to then agree he's not the guy. So,
which has happened before, Mike. Right. It happened before. Remember when Todd Haley left and Randy Fichtner became the guy with the offense? And everybody's like, well, Todd Haley's gone. What happened here?
Yeah, we're scoring less a game with similar players.
And it was one of those things that's like, maybe you got to acknowledge the fact that your quarterback's closer to 40 than he is to 30.
Yeah.
Maybe you got to acknowledge that you had two all-pro offensive linemen that are on the tail end of their careers and the guys around them who are very good. I mean, think about that. That entire group from left to right, Villanueva, Foster, Pouncey, DeCastro, Gilbert, within 2 years, all gone. all of them.
Yeah, yeah.
And we're like, wait a minute, what's happening? All of that is changing because you had an offense that was beginning to age out, and including the quarterback. And then in his age 39 season, he blows out his elbow. What do you think was going to happen? Like all of these things were all coinciding at the same time. And everybody's like, oh, it must be offensive coordinator. No, folks, everything around you is changing because the personnel is changing. Guys get older. Guys, their talents start to wane. Look at the precipitous drop-off we saw just with Marquise Pouncey alone. Just from 1 year, he was one of the best, and to the next year, he couldn't get a snap out.
Yeah, the best on that line. Right. Yeah.
He was
and maybe he was mentally out of it too. He's kind of said that. And
he was the best center in football for what, the better part of a decade?
Yeah, that's why.
Just like that.
That's why people argue that even though the career wasn't very, very long, that you can argue a Hall of Fame case because how good he was, and it didn't go on to probably get him there. But 100% talking with Josh Taylor here, KDKA 93.7 The Fan. Well, I just want to connect the dots now on another Steelers topic that's been polarizing, and we also could go Mike Tomlin, but we'll do that for another day. We'll do it, and obviously that's very, very polarizing. It's just going to be eternally polarizing, and there's been years that he underachieved. There's years that he overachieved, and the record's what it is right now. But in terms of another player that impacts this on the field, that's taken this to a conversation off the field, again, maybe annoyingly so, that is George Pickens. We mentioned him before, and it felt like upon his draft that you're going to hear a lot of Pickett to Pickens. And yes, receivers in the NFL sometimes feel like they're a dime a dozen, and you get one elite and you can get another elite, and there's a lot of talent there. But it felt like the Steelers had the quarterback of the future. It felt like they're also going to have the receiver of the future, independent of the running back position, but certainly maybe those guys of the future too. And George Pickens, wow, the circus catches are there. And we were at camp, and the entire camp was about all the circus catches and all the social media fun and the one-handed catches, but a lot of the footwork seems like it was never really worked on. We're seeing that to be a little bit of a problem now for him to go to just good athletic freak to actually elite receiver that you can immediately jump in the NFL and become at that position. And then separate to that, he leaves the game. They win. He's not involved that much, doesn't have a great game, has the fundamental issues that I'm bringing up now, and then goes on IG and says, free me, and then unfollows everybody. And he's since come out basically and argued that we're just making things up in the media and it's no big deal and we shouldn't care who he follows, and following people just an immature thing to care about. And maybe he's right in that end. But my question is, well, then why unfollow him if you have no problem with it? Why are you posting what you're posting? So my question to you then, Josh, is his antics off the field, for lack of a better description of them, much ado about nothing, or is there something there? And then where are you on George Pickens' progression as a receiver that is clearly the one for the future of this team? Because there's issues there on the field. And then, yes, he is dependent on how good everyone else is in order to be good. That's why the position is a quote-unquote diva position. But the off-the-field stuff doesn't seemingly help either. But he claims it's just much ado about nothing.
I won't say it's much ado about nothing, but if you have to rate the scale from what George Pickens did with some of the other internet-related scenarios we've seen with other receivers in this organization, I'm not putting it up that high. If we're putting it with other off-field things we've seen with other receivers in this organization, I'm not putting it that high.
Do you like the Tomlin line, what he said? It's a pebble in my shoe.
A pebble in his shoe. Let's be clear about this. Let's get the real understanding as to why Mike Tomlin can't see that as such a huge thing. George Pickens is what, 22 years old?
Yeah.
Mike Tomlin has kids that same age, or around that same age. Who do you think is going to understand how a 22-year-old is acting with somebody with kids in their 20s? That's like you and me being able to understand how a toddler is going to respond to some things, because you and I both have toddlers.
Right.
We're going to know what to do with a toddler when a toddler gets upset. Now, someone that doesn't have kids, or someone who has maybe older kids and might have forgotten how long ago
it's been a while.
Those years, they might respond a little bit differently. But we have toddlers, so we know how a toddler's going to act. I know when my son's tired. I know because he's going to try to run all over the room and do everything he can to take focus off the fact that he's sleepy. And if you even mention doing something that's associated with sleep, he's going to lose his mind. I know that's coming because my son's 2. You know what 22-year-old kids do now?
You have people come over all the time with my daughter that say like, oh, all of a sudden she got her second wind and she wants to have some fun and play. And I'm like, no, she's really tired still. And she's delirious now. She's like delirious where it's a whole different level. We got to get her in bed right now.
And she's fighting. Exactly.
So I hear you there.
But like, you know what 22-year-olds do? 22-year-olds, they take out their frustrations on social media. They unfollow people.
Yeah.
They put stuff up and say they put their emotions out into the ether because that's what they're used to seeing. Mike, a lot of us, especially if you're in my age group, if you're in your 40s, you didn't grow up with social media. And for a lot of us, I think we're thanking our lucky stars we didn't grow up with social media. Some of us might not be in the places where we are right now if there was social media.
I grew up. I'm in my 30s still. I'm a little younger than you, but yeah, same thing for sure.
But like it's one of those questions. It's like, well, remember how you were when you were 22? Are you really that concerned about that? Because I know I'm not compared to how I was when I was 22. I'm not going to go into detail, no, but I'll give you something that's kind of small. I'll go back to Duquesne because I still do some broadcasting for football and basketball games a few times a year for Duquesne. And it's funny because like, oh, it's so great to have you back. And I'm like, I kind of joke around. I'm like, yeah, if you guys knew how I was as a student, you wouldn't have me back. Like, it's just kind of a running joke that I have. But I say all that to say this. I'm going to take a 22-year-old being frustrated with how things are going and kind of taking it out on social media. I'm going to take that as opposed to some of the other things we've seen with wide receivers as organization.
If we're comparing, absolutely.
If you have to pick and choose what you're going to live with, and Mike Tomlin has seen 10 times worse. He's going to live with this.
Yeah, he's been the man. It's not like his first year on the job. He's been the man for it all. Yeah.
He's seen way worse over the previous 16 years he's been a head coach. So, he's going to be able to downplay this because he's like, look, first of all, I've been through worse. Second of all, I have kids his age. Third of all, it's not like he's doing what he did on the field to hurt the team potentially. Because when you hear about the situation with Tusa Okorafor, that sounds like it was something that happened on the field that was detrimental to the team in that moment.
Or even Trubisky last year. The rumors of him and Trubisky last year, which you could then argue, like, how is that going to help you on the field if he
him and Deontay Johnson. Like that was something that was detrimental to the team in that moment. It's
bigger deal than social media for sure. Yeah.
And I'll also say this too, and this is something that is more reflective on George Pickens than it is on us. You can't tell me George Pickens isn't frustrated with himself for that play where he should have had both feet down in the end zone for a touchdown. It cost him an extra 4 points. And I think some of that, seeing Deontay get that touchdown in that moment and seeing those guys celebrating, and granted, it was a huge moment for Deontay Johnson. He hadn't caught a touchdown pass in 2 years. But in the same token, George Pickens is probably thinking, man, that should have been me. I should have done that. And you can see his face when they overturned that call. And there's that look at his face. He's just like, he knew he messed up, and he knew he messed up big. And when you're a young guy with that much expected on you in that situation and you fail to do the simple thing you're supposed to do, you're going to lash out. You're going to react a little bit adversely. That's why I'm not ready to be like, oh, well, Mike Tomlin did this and didn't do this, because they're not the same situation. We can't try to make everything the same.
I think a lot of fans are beaten down with PTSD from what you're bringing up, though. They know that it's been a series of receivers that every time you're into receiver one on the Steelers, it ends up being off the field things. And we're talking about even Plesko Burris back in the day, even though his problems are really with the Giants and shooting.
There were Hines Ward issues too.
Hines Ward issues, getting obviously Emmanuel Sanders, going to Antonio Brown is just the peak of the mountain. Like, I think maybe the fan base, and most of them have been around a long time, obviously, are just kind of sick of, you draft a receiver, you pair him with the QB, and then you just got to bear with a personality defect in their eyes. But I get what you're saying too. And I've always said this to people, think I'm like a defender of TO and all the personality receivers. And if you want to put that on me, fine. But I do kind of get it, because it is the one position in all of sports, that no matter how good you are, how talented you are, unless everyone else does their job right, you can't succeed at yours. And it's really connected to one man. So yes, the offensive line and everybody else is involved, but if the quarterback is not hitting the targets, you're screwed, and you are getting paid off your individual numbers. Two of the three best receivers of all time, T.O. and Randy Moss behind Jerry Rice, they don't have a ring. It's all about their individual numbers. And now George Pickens is seeing, well, my quarterback misfiring this. Yes, a lot of it was on him. We're debating an offensive coordinator.
Right.
He's innately going to be frustrated because he needs his numbers to be right, even though the team needs to win too. I get the frustration there.
I'll add this to your statement, to what you just said, as far as everybody else being able to do their job to succeed. Yeah. I'll add this too. But when you have a receiver who's really good at what he does, he makes everybody else's job.
That does happen. Easier. That does happen.
Now, it's not every wide receiver.
Happen. And you can elevate a QB. We've seen receivers elevate a quarterback.
Well, here's what I mean.
But everybody else.
There are a couple receivers, and it's not everyone. Not everyone fits this category. Mm-hmm. But there's a group of receivers out there, when they do their jobs well, they make everyone else's jobs easier. Yeah. And George Pickens is one of those guys. Kenny Pickett even talked about it after the game. Here's another reason why I'm not freaking out about it, because it seems like the guys around him, Allen Robinson, had some great things to say about how you handle that. And Kenny Pickett, I thought, did a really good job of at least acknowledging the fact that, hey, he does a lot of things that make our jobs easier. The fact that he draws double teams makes it easier for Deontay Johnson.
There it is.
The fact that he commands so much attention for defenses makes it easier for the run game. You can't bring a safety down into the box if you're worried about George Pickens. And when you do bring a safety down into the box, go ask Baltimore how that worked out for them. It didn't work out too well for Baltimore.
And the double coverage is a big deal. Yeah.
You can't zero blitz with guys on the outside if you got George Pickens on the field, because Baltimore will tell you, we tried it and it didn't work, and we got smoked and we lost the game.
The Steelers fans have seen Juju Smith-Schuster with AB, and then Juju Smith-Schuster when the double coverage is on him instead of it being on AB. That is a big deal. And that's also helping Deontay now as much as he's a big deal to the offense. So George Pickens does bring that. That absolutely is part of it too. And that also connects, I think, the dots to Kenny Pickett being such a great leader, regardless of how he's playing on the field. He's saying all the things right. He's trying to keep this team together. The social media stuff is really, really annoying. Like, we both had to stay up at 3 a.m, get notifications during AB's day and worry about what he was doing on IG Live. Like, I don't want to live that life.
Those days are over.
Yeah, I don't want to live that life anymore. Like, I'm not turning on notifications for George Pickens. And if he's going to go on IG Live at 3 a.m, I'm just going to miss it. Like, I'm living that life now. So that I don't want to have happen again. I don't want to have that happen again.
All of it really, and we're kind of like laying all the stones in place. The truth of the matter is, it's all one giant marriage. It all has to really connect. Yeah. It all has to really click. And when it does, it's great. When it doesn't mean it's eternally doomed. You just got to go and work some things out. Yeah. And then once you work those things out, then it clicks again. It just,
and if you believe in a plan, we've also seen a lot of franchises, because this is knee jerk, unlike back in the day in the NFL. Like Peyton Manning's first 3 seasons, if he was playing today and having those 3 seasons, he would be out of the league for everybody, and he ends up being one of the best of all time. So you do have to wait. And the Steelers, to their credit, they do stay true to a plan, even though a lot of other franchises out there, they go 1-2 years and then it's just cut bait, and then we see they're back in the same mess again in a new marriage that also is not working out. And that's not a way to help anybody either. Josh Taylor of KDKA.
Hi, Jets.
Yeah, exactly. Josh Taylor of KDKA and 93.7 The Fan. Mike Trop here with Believe, and everywhere you get your podcasts. Mike Asti, as we're talking Steelers, and I do want to pivot here and talk some Penguins before we wrap this up. They're a polarizing team, but they're getting overshadowed by how polarizing the freaking Steelers obviously always are. And
I don't think they're complaining either.
Yeah, they're probably not complaining. And I think we're also kind of clearly seeing that no matter how much success the Penguins have had, because they've been more successful the last hour,
they got a couple more months of cover fire. If you
they got a couple more months of cover fire. But the way the fan base is acting at Penguin games shows you who they really care about. I'll just say that. Like, this is the more successful franchise they're watching, and they are chanting to fire somebody on the other franchise they're complaining about and also fans of. That right there shows you, no matter what the Penguins do, the Steelers are here all the time in Pittsburgh. That's just the way it is. You can't even debate it anymore.
But I do want to ask,
I do want to ask you, because this team has been a roller coaster ride so far in the season. It is still very, very young. They're an older team now, but they did obviously add Erik Karlsson in some pieces to hopefully kind of have one more shot at things with Crosby, Malkin, and Letang, who now have the record for the longest tenure of All-Stars together, and they've won championships, but some feel they've also squandered some seasons. It's a new regime in there now. What is this Penguins window for you? Because many were getting excited before the season thinking this window was wide open again, at least for 2 or 3 more years. So far, level of play, it feels like maybe it's really not. Maybe that was fool's gold. Is there a window not only to just crawl into the playoffs, but actually have this group lift the cup one more time?
I think there's a window for sure. As long as you have that specific group on the ice together, that window's going to remain open. Is it going to be sometimes held open? Is it going to be open on its own? Is it going to be ledged in with a wayward piece of wood?
Like it was
probably. like it was at one point. It's probably just propped open with a wayward piece of wood. It is, but the truth of the matter is, you have that group of guys together, you're always going to have at least some semblance of a shot. But the truth of the matter is, the older they get, the more specific you have to be with what you put around them, and that's what's important. And it's really no different than football from that perspective.
Yeah.
But I think the fact that they have at least tried to put as many complementary guys around that group to make it better, because I think bringing in Erik Karlsson was a very important thing to do. I thought
that's a win now move. That's a win now move.
But I also thought the fact that they restructured a lot of the other things on the blue line around Erik Karlsson, they shipped a couple guys out and brought a couple guys back. They made some changes at the bottom six. I think that's equally as important, because you could talk about a team being good at the top of the roster, but there's a lot of top-heavy teams that don't go far because they're not built at the bottom end. It's like a house that has really nice paint and crown molding, but the foundation's falling apart.
Look at some Penguin playoff losses. They've had those issues in terms of depth.
Yeah. And I felt the issue last season was the depth on the defensive core and the bottom six were really, really glaring problems, because we can talk about the goaltending till we're blue in the face, and I'm not holding Tristan Jarry blameless by any way, shape, or form, because there are some things he is expected to do, and he has not done them consistently. But at the same time, you got 5 other guys out there, and they have to try to make his job easier. It's no different than the 10 guys around the quarterback making his job easier. There are ways to help Tristan Jarry out. You got to be more responsible with the puck. You got to have better possession of it. You can't turn it over. This team has had some really bad issues turning the puck over and leaving Tristan Jarry just out there on an island. At the same time, as my buddy Pat Damp likes to say, you're allowed to make a save.
You are.
You
are.
This is true.
Now, some goalies are required to make more saves than others.
Right.
Right. I mean, but
you're still paid to do that job. But at the same time, and that once again, not to let Tristan Jarry totally off the hook. At the same time, it's the job of the other 5 guys to relieve that pressure on the guy in net. So there has to be a lot there. And the power play, I know, has been a big topic of discussion recently. Here's the thing that frustrates me. You bring in a guy like Erik Karlsson, who's really, really easily putting himself in the discussion as one of the greater defensemen that's ever played in this game.
Yeah.
And he's your guy who should be quarterbacking your power play.
Yeah,
and
not just defensively. Yeah,
I'm going to take you back, 15 years? There was a time when they had another really great defenseman, one of the greatest ever played the game. He quarterbacked their defense, and everybody got out of the way. He did what he did, and everybody else adjusted around it. This team had Sergei Gonchar, and you saw what these guys did with Sergei Gonchar, quarterback in the power play. Do that with Erik Karlsson. Let Erik Karlsson do the things that he does, and everybody else is trying to find their way around. When you have guys like Jake Gensel and Brian Rust who are very good at doing that, or just getting in where they fit in, Jake Gensel might be the best as far as just getting in where he fits in and just doing the small things that help a power play out. Brian Rust is really good at that, just getting in where he fits in.
He's become really good at that. Yeah.
He's become really good at it. Let Erik Karlsson do what he's great at. Everybody else, just get in where you fit in. If you got to split some stars up and make 2 separate power play units, do that. But don't mess up the one good thing you got going by trying to put too much on top of it. Let Erik Karlsson be the centerpiece of that power play and then fill in all the cracks around it. And if you got to put together 2 really good power play units instead of one super ridiculous one that isn't efficient, is that a bad problem? I don't think so.
No,
it sounds like a good problem to me.
Yeah,
so
really,
let Erik Karlsson do his thing.
If you're not going to do that, then it defeats the purpose of bringing him in. Like you merge a little bit of the future for a win now mode with a young regime that's coming in and they want to win now. And the previous regime got criticized for a lot of win now moves. So if you're going to do that again, then you got to be willing to go all in, not, half the chips in the middle of the table and just do it a little bit. Yeah.
I got to give a shout out to Jesse Marshall. I thought he had a great
And I've had him on this show talking about this before, by the way.
Shout out to the Abbott of hockey. That's my guy. Wu-Tang. Anyway, he had a great analogy talking about how, this power play was a high-performance sports car, and you filled the gas tank full of Sprite. It makes no sense. He's absolutely right, though. You cannot bring in an Erik Karlsson as the guy who's supposed to be such a big driver of your offense and not let him do the things that have allowed him to be the defenseman who he is.
And it may happen, but
absolutely no sense. I think there would be a much bigger response as to what you saw if he was allowed to do that. I think you'd see a much better response of what this team does if you saw a little bit more balance in the lines. I think if you saw a little bit more fortification in the bottom six, I think people are getting what they asked for. We saw Jeff Carter scratched finally from the lineup. That was something people have been clamoring for a long time. I think Kyle Dubas is committed to really trying to fix what some of these problems are. You've heard him talk about how they're going to continue to look at the bottom six and see what they can do. I think Kyle Dubas was brought into this organization for a reason. I think he fits totally what this new ownership group thinks as far as being forward thinking and being willing to try things that are a little bit different than what everybody else might do. But you got to be able to take that and translate it to what you see on the ice. And sometimes letting the guys who do things well do what they do, sometimes that's the simpler option.
Yeah, it can be. And it does appear like he is not only a forward thinking guy, but also hungry to get this done, like willing to take a process, but hungry to get it done now and build his legacy while the team's building their legacy still.
There's pressure on him too. There's pressure on Kyle Dubas
I mean,
too,
if this team is barely making the playoffs for 2-3 years in a row, he's going to get attacked just like all the other ones have got attacked, and it's going to be.
And think about the previous job he was in and the pressure he was under to win that
and he
job
built that
Toronto.
up to success. They finally won a series for the first time in forever, and then they're ousting him basically.
So he's got something to prove as well as everybody else. But when you walk into a situation where they're going to let you do things the way you want to do them, and you've got this collection of guys over here, like, I get to work with these dudes? Really? Seriously?
I don't think he would be in Pittsburgh too if he didn't have that carte blanche. Like, he could have had any other job. He could have had other jobs. So he had those meetings and basically said, I want to do this my way. I'll take your input, but I got to be the man in charge.
I think it was a very good meeting of the minds there. I think it was a very good meeting of the minds in that regard where they were going to let him do things his way. But I think also his philosophy of how he wanted to do things probably dovetailed really well with Fenway Sports Group. Remember, this is the group that rode the coat, that really put Theo Epstein in the driver's seat and let them drive them to championships in Boston when they hadn't won in almost 100 years. So they've had some experience with trusting a young guy who thinks a little bit differently and giving him the keys and letting him drive. So it does fit. It does fit perfectly that way. That's why I felt like when we learned that they were moving on from Ron Hextall and everybody started watching Toronto, like, well, are they going to keep Kyle Dubas? And we found out that he wasn't coming back to Toronto. I'm sitting there going, go drive up.
Yeah,
and
he
get him
fit
now.
perfectly. He fit perfectly.
Was just, I keep telling people there's going to come a time where you're going to start sending Christmas cards to Toronto because I think they're going to look back and regret it, and I think Penguin fans are going to look back and be really grateful for it.
Yeah, and I think even Toronto media at that time, it seemed like they kind of realized what you're saying. Like, we're not appreciating. This is the best ownership group in terms of an executive running the ship in a very long time. There's not been a cup, but there also hasn't been a cup here in 60 years. Like, what are we
1967,
doing? Right?
So
like
what are we doing?
Since expansion. So it's not like that should be the bar here. So I totally feel he was the perfect fit. We'll see how it works though, but. Yeah, and I also think some fans, I know there are a lot of fans and even people in media that were saying, well, okay, my issue with Fenway Sports Group is we don't know much about them. They're very kind of secretive. They wouldn't even put it in their bio on Twitter that they were with the Penguins. We're learning a little bit more about them now. Like decisions that they're making in terms of who they're hiring, certainly Kyle Dubas at the top. We're now learning about them a little bit and what they're going to do with the Penguins, not just what they did with the Red Sox and over in Europe.
Let's be fair. If you don't know what Fenway Sports Group is doing, folks, look around.
They're doing more than just running the Penguins. 100%. Yes.
There's a European soccer team. There's NASCAR. They were having success in baseball 20 years ago, folks.
That's what I mean. They wouldn't be in this business if it wasn't for the other success.
Google is free.
It is. Yes. I do think it was a bit weird that they were kind of like not branding it on their website and social media that they were leading the Penguins as much as the Red Sox, but that's probably immaterial to what's important.
There's some specific details in branding that you kind of have
that's true.
They have to evolve with over time.
I get that.
But like it's for the time that it takes for people to get online and type out really ridiculous things. You can look up the stuff that's actually true in that same time frame, right? You could just go and find it.
Yeah,
and it would save you an embarrassing tweet or two.
I think as we kind of wrap things up, I think there's also something that we've both been banging the drum on pretty much our whole career, that everybody in the society has this thing about them that they feel like they got to comment on everything right away. Number one, you're welcome to take some time, digest it in, and do a Google search, or you are definitely better off not commenting versus commenting ridiculous things that have complete ignorance attached to them and you didn't actually do any research. It is not better to comment complete ignorance than to not comment.
Mark Twain walked the earth, folks. That's all I'm saying. Mark Twain walked the earth, and he dropped some nuggets here and there that we can actually listen to.
Yeah, that's what I got for you as my nugget of wisdom. And I'm not claiming to be a genius, but I've been picking up on that one over the years for sure. Josh Taylor of KDKA 93.7 The Fan. Josh, it was a great conversation as always. Definitely hope to be talking to you again here or other places. So
I'm looking forward to talking more about the Steelers team, and I'm looking forward. We didn't get to talk about college football. I was a little disappointed.
We did not. We could do a whole nother show on that someday. And I've hit a lot of those because obviously professionally I'm covering college right now. But
you know me, man. I love talking about college football, and believe it or not, this is a little known secret. I love talking about West Virginia football.
I know. I've told somebody. I've actually. Yeah,
I've covered him for a couple of years over at Triple Live Radio. The first team I rooted for in this area was West Virginia.
Yeah, I told somebody, and I wasn't 100% sure on this because you haven't admitted this, but I was like, I think Josh is a closet West Virginia fan. I
grew up in the Hill District. Hill District, and in my neighborhood, Major Harris was a god.
Yeah.
So I rooted for West Virginia because Major Harris played for West Virginia. I cried in 1989 after that Fiesta Bowl against Notre Dame.
You did?
Because Major Harris lost a football game. That was my introduction to college football, was Major Harris in West Virginia. So I got to cover West Virginia for a couple of years. My family has history in West Virginia. Between my grandfather and my dad, they pastored in West Virginia for a number of years. So I got some ties there too. I still keep an eye on what's going on down in Morgantown. I'm always happy to go down to Morgantown. By the way, got to give a shout out to Duquesne. They were the team that scored the most points for any Pittsburgh program in Morgantown this season. So shout out to Jerry Smith and the Dukes.
Yeah, they did do that. They did do that. Yes, and yeah,
on the brink of another NEC. By the way, they already won a share of the NEC title. If they win this week, they will win the NEC title outright, which is another berth to the FCS playoff. Because Duquesne is a program in town that actually wins its conference and goes to its subdivisions playoff, and even wins a game here and there. Just want to point that out.
Yeah, I will say, though, all respect to Duquesne at their level. They're having success at their level. But
at their level. They do what they got to do.
The West Virginia Duquesne game in all my years, my least enjoyable game I've ever covered.
Oh, that was so weird.
An hour and 50-minute weather delay in the middle, continuous announcements of, we saw lightning again 8 miles away, so we're going to make this take longer. Duquesne.
It was strange because I was there. I was in Morgantown that day. I was doing a tailgate with some friends there. I had to come back because I had to work TV that evening. But I was out there. I was down in the earlier part of the day, and I'm driving back and I'm listening to the game. I'm like, we're having a weather delay.
And then it was, as you're mentioning, it was a freaking FCS game that was at night, which shouldn't have been.
But I'm driving through Greene County, and I'm like, what weather delay are you talking about? It seems fine on this side of the state line.
Light. That was another thing got to teach everybody. It's not just rain, it's thunder and lightning, and the lightning's the issue. And then Duquesne actually was in the game early. Yeah. So I'm having, shout out to Mike Montoro, the Lester Jordan winner. He's telling us, Duquesne's not going to agree to have this game just end here because they're in it, even though that a lot of the time would be what would happen because they would still get the money from the bye game. But they're freaking in it. They would eventually get blown out. So everything about that was crazy. And then I had to drive the guy that was covering Duquesne for us past my house of where I live, another 20 miles deeper into Pittsburgh, then go home, got home at 4 a.m. covering an FCS game. Yeah, Zach Weiss. Yeah.
Zach, shout out to Zach.
Yeah, that was a great time with him. But I mean, I told you where I live. And then you kind of know where he lives. And we're going from West Virginia. So I'm driving by my house.
Yeah. And I live close to town, and Zach's far from where I live. So I get it.
Yeah, that was rough. But
Zach's an old friend. We've done a lot of Duquesne related stuff together, and he's one of my wrestling buddies too. So Zach,
he is a wrestling fan like us too. Good man. We talked a lot a wrestling at our 3 a.m. car ride. Zach's a good people, but that was interesting. So I will then admit I will drop that anybody wondering, because I've heard that from some colleagues down there. Is Josh Taylor a closet West Virginia fan? I see he likes a lot of your coverage and things like that. I'm like, he has connections.
Yeah, I covered West Virginia for a couple of years for Triple Live Radio, football and basketball. I was there for the Kevin White years at West Virginia.
Okay.
I was covering West Virginia for a while. So
talk about a player that had all the makings that it didn't happen for in the pros.
Heartbreaking, man. Loved watching that kid play. Yeah. He was just a genuinely good kid too. Kevin White was just a remarkable person. I was really rooting hard for him, and to see how things went with him, just a terrible luck. It was
and
really
at least
really
Major
hard to watch.
Harris got his due and got his number up there. I mean, it took a
Finally,
long
finally,
time. Took a long time. And as I've been
Yeah.
telling people, that there's a
Long
lot
overdue.
more of that. I mean, the program's finally looking into the history properly. So
Yeah, and
as how some
I'm
things have
connected
been
with other West
claimed.
Virginia
And
guys. I'm connected with
yeah,
guys like Mike Logan, and worked with Logs years ago over at Trib Live Radio. So there's some
Logan's
connections with West
awesome
Virginia guys
too.
I got,
Like
and I have
Logan.
some family history there too.
Rashid
So yeah,
Marshall back with the program. Did a podcast
another
with
guy
him.
who grew up in my neighborhood, Rashid
Yeah,
Marshall. So there's that too.
Okay. That podcast was successful, and then unfortunately it did so well it had to end because he joined the program.
Well, there you go.
But all the love to Rashid and people. So yeah, that absolutely. So I'm glad to hear all of that. I'm sure the West Virginia fans will be glad to hear all of that in terms of your connection down there.
I'm supporting you guys, man. I should say I'm supporting you, but I empathize. I'm there. I'm paying attention to them.
I see you are paying attention to the Mountaineers.
Definitely.
But thanks for joining me here for this show. And we definitely maybe we'll do this again, and we'll talk some college football. We'll talk some overall spectrum, and maybe talk some Mountaineers as well, for sure, on future programs.
We'll handle some more dad tips too.
Yeah, and more dad. I'm willing to take them. More dad tips too.
Definitely. We'll share some of our expertise in that regard, since we're gaining it on a daily basis.
Yeah, for sure. So again, Josh Taylor, 93.7 The Fan and KDKA. Appreciate the time, man.
Appreciate you, brother.
Yep. Great conversation as always. Always love talking to Josh. We do have kind of a quasi career connection of calling high school games at what was Champ Sports Network, the same network there. Then I kind of followed him at Trib Live. We've kind of worked with each other at different places and been on each other's shows, like him now being on this one. So colleague, someone that I've known for a while, and he does have the Mountaineers connection there. Of course, I'm an alum, and then now do cover the program professionally for WV Sports now that Josh is aware of. And that's kind of where I thought, like, he's liking a lot of this. I'm seeing people tag him in a lot of this, like, didn't go there. I knew he went to Duquesne, but I think there's a connection. I think there's some fandom there. Had some colleagues down there ask me, like, hey, like, Josh Taylor's loving this. Like, that's random, or is it just for you and supporting your work from your professional connection? I'm like, it might be some of that, but I think he's paying more attention than maybe others. I think there's a connection there, and there is. So we're able to talk about all the polarizing topics there, certainly surrounding the Steelers and Penguins. Penguins have a little bit longer of a window, according to Josh, but you got to do it right. You got to, seize the day and use Karlsson right, because that's why you got him. But you also got to give this ownership time. And I do believe this management group, Kyle Dubas on down, is the right system that's there. And then, of course, Pickett, they're going to give time, even though there's reason to be maybe a little worried. It's not just on him, nor is it on everybody else. And there are reason to be concerned because he's not getting it done at times. But the polarizing conversation maybe will get a little bit more reasonable. And if Canada ever is gone, the blame then could immediately fall right on Pickett, and that potentially be a problem for him. But the Steelers are not knee-jerk, unlike other franchises. They are not knee-jerk, so you got more years of this for sure. No matter how this ends, there's going to be more years of Kenny Pickett in Pittsburgh, for better or worse. Again, you can listen to Mic Drop everywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, TuneIn, Google Play, etc. And, of course, you can find every episode of the Mic Drop podcast on the Believe Network, and also kind of, some radio hits that I do as well. I throw that in the player, so you can get those other places, obviously, at those channels, but also on Believe as well.